In the vast world of global agriculture, power flows not from the land but from laboratories and boardrooms. 5 multinational corporations now control 60% of the world's commercial seed market, a quiet monopoly that shapes the destiny of nations. Nowhere are the consequences more visible than in Burkina Faso, where endless rows of cotton plants stand as silent witnesses to a broken promise. The cotton balls hang limp and discolored, misshapen relics of what should have been pristine white gold. Across 2 million hectares, farmers watch helplessly as their primary source of income withers despite following every corporate instruction to the letter. The fiber quality, once renowned globally, has deteriorated season after season, while the company's profits have only multiplied. But on September 17, 2024, the silent suffering erupted into defiance. Standing before thousands of farmers in Ouagadougou's sun-drenched central square, military leader Ibrahim Traoré held aloft a handful of damaged cotton, while cameras broadcast his message worldwide. The days of slavery are over. Our farmers will no longer be laboratory subjects for Western corporations while their own harvests fail and their children go hungry. The crowd's roar carried beyond the square, across borders, through markets and into the halls of power in Washington. Within hours, what began as a local agricultural dispute transformed into a direct challenge to America's economic dominance in Africa, an unprecedented rebellion against corporate control of the very seeds of life. For centuries, the people of Burkina Faso have measured their lives by the rhythm of planting and harvest. This landlocked West African nation, whose very name means land of honest people, has cultivated not just crops, but a profound national identity rooted in agricultural self-sufficiency. The colonizers came and went, borders were drawn and redrawn, but through it all the Burkinabe farmers maintained their ancient connection to seeds passed down through generations. Cotton transformed this relationship. Introduced during French colonial rule and expanded after independence in 1960, cotton became known as Burkina Faso's white gold. The numbers tell an extraordinary story. Cotton now accounts for 40% of the country's GDP, employs nearly 3 million citizens, and generates 60% of export revenues. These aren't merely economic statistics. They represent the livelihood of entire communities and the foundation of national independence. Into this delicate ecosystem stepped MonsantoAgri, with promises of revolutionary genetically modified cotton in 2008. Their patented seeds, they claimed, would increase yields by 30% and resist the pests that had plagued local farmers for generations. For a developing nation seeking economic advancement, the technology seemed to offer a shortcut to prosperity. Ibrahim Traoré, the 34-year-old military leader who seized power in September 2022, initially continued his predecessor's embrace of Western agricultural technology. A former artillery officer with a surprisingly deep knowledge of farming, gained from childhood years spent in his family's fields, Traoré initially pursued modernization through technology. The Trump administration, following decades of American policy, supported this approach, viewing Africa as both an emerging market for American agricultural products and a critical frontier in global food security. But beneath these diplomatic pleasantries lay a fundamental power imbalance. MonsantoAgri's contracts granted them unprecedented control over Burkina Faso's agricultural destiny, dictating what farmers could plant, how they could harvest, and to whom they could sell. As crop failures multiplied, a profound question emerged. Can a small African nation of 21 million people successfully challenge one of the world's most powerful agricultural corporations backed by the United States government? Can a former colony reclaim control over its most fundamental resource, the seeds that feed its people? What began as a business relationship has evolved into something far more consequential, a test case for the future of global agricultural sovereignty and the economic independence of an entire continent. The story of genetically modified cotton in Burkina Faso begins not with suspicion but with hope. In 2008, representatives from MonsantoAgri arrived in Bobo-Dioulasso, the country's agricultural hub, with promises that seemed too remarkable to dismiss. Their genetically modified Bob cotton seeds contained a protein from the soil bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis that would act as a built-in insecticide, targeting the bollworm that devastated up to 40% of traditional cotton crops annually. Their presentation featured glossy photographs of abundant cotton fields stretching to the horizon, bountiful yields untroubled by pests. The marketing campaign was meticulous and comprehensive. MonsantoAgri established demonstration plots in every cotton-growing region, showing side-by-side comparisons where their GM cotton thrived while traditional plants withered under insect attacks. They flew influential village chiefs and agricultural officials to American cotton farms, where visitors marveled at the technological efficiency of modern agriculture. Local radio stations broadcast testimonials from early adopter farmers who reported saving money on pesticides while harvesting unprecedented yields. The message was clear. Traditional farming meant remaining trapped in poverty, while embracing GM technology offered a pathway to prosperity. The initial results seemed to validate these promises. Between 2008 and 2015, cotton production increased by 22%, while pesticide use decreased by almost 70%. Farmers who had spent generations struggling against bollworms suddenly found themselves with surplus income. The government showcased these achievements to international visitors, and agricultural delegations from across Africa arrived to witness what was being called the Burkina miracle. At international conferences, MonsantoAgri cited the country as proof that GM technology could transform African agriculture and address food security challenges across the continent. The first signs of trouble appeared subtly. In 2016, textile manufacturers began reporting irregularities in fiber length, a crucial quality parameter that determines cotton's value. The differences were minor, just millimeters, but in the precision-dependent world of textile manufacturing, these small variations had significant consequences. By 2018, the deterioration was impossible to ignore. Cotton fibers were consistently shorter than the industry standard, reducing their market value by 30%. Simultaneously, farmers noticed the plants were producing fewer cotton balls per hectare, despite following all recommended practices. Agricultural scientists from the National Agricultural Research Institute conducted extensive studies across multiple growing regions. Their findings revealed a complex failure. The genetic modifications had inadvertently affected the expression of genes responsible for fiber development. Furthermore, the bet protein's effectiveness against bollworms was diminishing with each generation as pest populations evolved resistance faster than anticipated. Most alarming was evidence that the GM variety was cross-pollinating with native cotton species, potentially compromising the genetic integrity of traditional varieties that had been cultivated for centuries. As harvest deteriorated, farmer discontent crystallized into organized resistance. In 2020, the movement for agricultural sovereignty emerged in the western provinces, led by farmers who had maintained seed-saving traditions despite corporate prohibitions. They began secretly cultivating heritage cotton varieties, documenting comparative yields, and sharing results through encrypted messaging networks to avoid government surveillance. By 2022, their underground seed exchange network had spread to over 200 villages. The economic consequences rippled through Burkina Faso's economy. Cotton exports declined by 45% between 2016 and 2023. As international buyers turned to more reliable sources, processing facilities closed, eliminating thousands of jobs. Unable to repay loans for GM seeds and accompanying chemicals, thousands of farmers defaulted, losing land that had been in their families for generations. The reduction in income led to increased food insecurity, with nutrition surveys showing alarming increases in childhood malnutrition in cotton-growing regions. What had begun as a technological promise had evolved into a national crisis, one that would soon ignite an unprecedented challenge to the established order of global agriculture. Ibrahim Traoré's path to leadership was forged in military academies, but his worldview was shaped in the cotton fields of Bobo-Dioulasso. As the grandson of a traditional seed keeper, Traoré spent his childhood summers helping his grandfather select the strongest cotton plants for seed preservation, learning to identify subtle variations in fiber quality by touch alone. This agricultural heritage remained dormant during his rise through military ranks, but resurfaced with unexpected force when he assumed leadership of Burkina Faso in 2022, amid growing agricultural turmoil. In January 2024, Traoré established what was officially called the Agricultural Sustainability Commission, but what insiders knew as Operation Cotton Truth. This clandestine investigative unit operated with unprecedented secrecy, recruiting agricultural scientists, economists, and legal experts who worked from a converted military facility outside the capital. The commission's existence remained unknown to foreign officials and corporate representatives, allowing investigators to gather evidence without alerting MonsantoAgri to their activities. The team collected soil samples across growing regions, interviewed hundreds of farmers, and analyzed decades of agricultural data to establish patterns invisible to individual farmers. The investigation's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A senior Burkinabe manager at MonsantoAgri's regional headquarters, whose own family farm had been devastated by crop failures, began secretly copying internal communications and technical reports. Over 3 months, this whistleblower transferred over 6,000 pages of documents to the commission, including laboratory test results, executive emails, and financial projections. The most damning evidence included a 2014 internal assessment predicting potential fiber quality degradation that was never shared with Burkina Faso's government or farmers, and communications showing executives discussing acceptable failure rates in economic rather than human terms. The Commission's analysis revealed systematic corporate negligence. Laboratory testing confirmed MonsantoAgri had conducted insufficient field trials in West African climatic conditions before commercial release. Their own data showed that after 3 generations, genetic stability declined significantly, with the bet protein production becoming erratic. Most disturbing were internal memos, acknowledging that genetic drift, the unintended transfer of modified genes to other plants, was inevitable but manageable from a liability perspective, suggesting the company knew contamination of indigenous cotton varieties would occur, but considered it an acceptable business risk. The contamination had progressed further than anyone suspected. Laboratory analysis of supposedly pure indigenous cotton collected from remote villages showed that 73% contained traces of the patented genes. This genetic contamination threatened not just current crops, but the entire agricultural heritage preserved through centuries of careful seed selection. The Commission documented accelerating biodiversity loss, with 17 traditional cotton varieties now functionally extinct due to genetic contamination, representing an irreplaceable loss of agricultural adaptations developed over generations. The economic findings proved equally alarming. A comprehensive analysis of the cotton value chain revealed that a staggering 94% of profits generated from Burkinabe cotton ultimately flowed to foreign shareholders and executives, while the farmers who produced the cotton retained only 6% despite bearing all production risks. Financial models demonstrated that even in successful years, the GM cotton system extracted more wealth from rural communities than traditional farming methods, when all factors including debt, input costs, and environmental impacts were properly calculated. Throughout spring 2024, Traoré conducted a series of confidential meetings that would reshape the country's agricultural future. He hosted agricultural scientists from Brazil's Embrapa Research Institute, who had developed non-GM, drought-resistant cotton varieties through conventional breeding techniques. Indian specialists shared successful organic cotton production methods that had revitalized rural economies in Maharashtra. Most significantly, Chinese agricultural experts proposed a comprehensive technology transfer program that would establish sovereign seed production facilities in Burkina Faso without the restrictive intellectual property controls imposed by Western corporations. As these alternatives took shape, Traoré prepared for a confrontation that would challenge not just one corporation, but an entire global agricultural system that had kept African nations dependent on foreign technology. The evidence his commission had gathered would soon become the foundation for an unprecedented act of agricultural rebellion, with consequences far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. September 17, 2024 began as an ordinary day in Ouagadougou. The annual National Agricultural Conference normally attracted little international attention, serving mainly as a forum for government officials to announce modest policy adjustments and subsidy programs. This year, however, the Grand People's Hall had been transformed. Enlarged photographs of withered cotton fields lined the entrance. Glass display cases held side-by-side samples of deteriorating GM cotton beside healthier traditional varieties. Most notably, security had been dramatically increased, with military personnel checking credentials with unprecedented thoroughness. When Ibrahim Traoré approached the podium at precisely 10 a.m., the audience of 3,000 farmers, agricultural officials, and international observers fell silent. His speech began not with political rhetoric, but with personal testimony, describing his grandfather's traditional seed selection methods and the living heritage that connected generations of Burkinabe farmers to their land. He then methodically presented the investigation's findings through a series of stark comparisons: projected GM cotton yields versus actual harvests, promised economic benefits versus documented rural poverty, and corporate claims versus internal documents, now projected on screens throughout the hall. The pivotal moment came when Traoré held up 2 cotton balls, one stunted and discolored from recent GM crops, the other robust and healthy from heritage seeds grown in isolated test plots. "These are not just plants," he declared, his voice resonating through the hall. "These are symbols of 2 possible futures for our nation. One of dependence and decline, the other of sovereignty and prosperity." He paused, surveying the silent audience before delivering the statement that would reverberate globally. "The days of slavery are over. Our farmers will no longer be laboratory subjects for Western corporations while their own harvests fail and their children go hungry. The legal framework Traoré unveiled was comprehensive and immediate. Presidential Decree 2024-157 terminated all existing contracts with MonsantoAgri, citing systematic misrepresentation of product performance and deliberate concealment of known risks. The National Seed Sovereignty Act banned all genetically modified seeds from Burkina Faso's territory and established the legal principle that genetic resources derived from Burkinabe plants belong to the national heritage. Most significantly, the Agricultural Reparations Proclamation demanded compensation for crop failures, creating an independent tribunal to assess damages estimated at $2.10 billion, an unprecedented claim against an agricultural corporation by an African nation. International media reaction was swift, but deeply divided. Western business publications characterized the move as reckless agricultural nationalism that would deter critical investment in African development. Meanwhile, outlets across the global south celebrated a historic stand against corporate agricultural colonialism. Within hours, MonsantoAgri's stock price had fallen 17%, triggering circuit breakers on international exchanges as investors grappled with potential implications for agricultural technology deployment across Africa. The Trump administration responded with immediate diplomatic pressure. The State Department issued a statement expressing grave concern over contract violations and threats to American intellectual property, while the Commerce Department announced a review of Burkina Faso's preferential trade status. In a late-night post on social media, President Trump characterized Traoré's actions as the biggest heist in agricultural history and warned of severe consequences for nations that steal American technology. Within 48 hours, a high-level diplomatic delegation was dispatched to Ouagadougou with what insiders described as an offer Burkina Faso cannot afford to refuse. MonsantoAgri launched a sophisticated public relations counteroffensive, deploying agricultural experts across media platforms to attribute cotton failures to anomalous weather patterns, inadequate farmer education, and infrastructure limitations typical in developing economies. Their chief scientist published an open letter questioning the credibility of Burkina Faso's testing methodologies, while corporate representatives emphasized the company's decade-long investment in local agricultural development. Most effectively, they highlighted potential food security risks of rejecting agricultural technology in a region already vulnerable to climate change. As international pressure mounted, many expected Traoré to moderate his position or accept a negotiated compromise. Instead, the military leader doubled down, releasing additional documents and expanding seed sovereignty protections. What had begun as a technical dispute over cotton quality had evolved into something far more significant, a direct challenge to the fundamental power dynamics governing global agriculture and a test case for whether African nations could reclaim control over their most basic resources. What began as a single nation's stand against corporate agricultural dominance quickly ignited a revolutionary movement across West Africa. Within 72 hours of Traoré's announcement, videos of his speech, particularly the moment he held aloft the contrasting cotton bolls, had been viewed over 30 million times across Africa. In rural villages without reliable internet, audio recordings spread through community radio stations and mobile phones passed between farmers. The visual power of those two cotton samples, one vibrant and healthy, the other withered and compromised, transcended language barriers and technical complexities, distilling the conflict into a symbol everyone could understand. The response came first from Mali, where the National Federation of Cotton Producers organized simultaneous demonstrations in 17 cities. Farmers marched carrying traditional cotton plants adorned with small national flags, their signs declaring, "Our seeds, our future." In Niger, agricultural cooperatives representing over 100,000 farmers published an open letter supporting Burkina Faso's actions and demanding their own government investigate similar crop failures. Ghana's influential Traditional Seed Keepers Association, composed primarily of women who had preserved indigenous varieties for generations, staged a dramatic ceremony where elderly seed guardians passed seedlings to young farmers, symbolizing the transmission of agricultural heritage that corporate control had threatened. On October 5th, delegates from 14 West African nations gathered in Bamako for what was initially planned as an emergency consultation, but evolved into something far more consequential. After 3 days of intense deliberation, they emerged with the West African Seed Sovereignty Alliance (WESA), a transnational coalition with explicit goals of reclaiming agricultural autonomy across the region. Their founding charter declared, The seeds that feed our people cannot be owned by those who have never tilled our soil or felt our sun. International power dynamics shifted as new alliances formed around agricultural independence. China seized the strategic opening, announcing a $7.8 billion infrastructure package focused on irrigation systems and water management across alliance nations, technology precisely calibrated to support non-GM cotton varieties in drought-prone regions. The offer came with notably few political conditions, requiring only preferential access to raw cotton for China's expanding textile industry. Brazilian agricultural experts arrived within weeks, bringing decades of experience in tropical agriculture developed outside Western corporate frameworks. India dispatched a team of 50 specialists in organic pest management techniques that had revolutionized cotton production in Gujarat and Maharashtra without genetic modification. The movement's most innovative development was the rapid establishment of community seed banks, secure facilities where indigenous varieties could be preserved from genetic contamination. The first opened in Bobo Dioulasso, constructed inside a repurposed colonial-era building, once used to store cotton for export to France, a symbolism not lost on local farmers. By December 2024, 83 such facilities operated across 7 countries, each protecting agricultural biodiversity, while training new generations in traditional seed selection techniques, enhanced by modern scientific understanding. Economic ripple effects transformed regional trade patterns with remarkable speed. Mali redirected cotton exports from European markets to Vietnamese and Bangladeshi manufacturers who offered premium prices for organic, non-GM fibers. Niger developed specialized processing facilities for traditional varieties with unique properties particularly valued in high-end textile production. Ghana established the continent's first farmer-owned cotton certification system, connecting directly with ethical fashion brands willing to pay sustainability premiums. As 2024 drew to a close, public support for agricultural independence had spread beyond cotton-growing regions to urban centers across Africa. University students organized under the banner Decolonize Agriculture, while prominent cultural figures incorporated seed sovereignty themes into music, art, and literature. What MonsantoAgri had dismissed as an isolated regulatory dispute had transformed into something far more threatening to corporate interests. A fundamental reimagining of Africa's agricultural future that rejected the premise of external control over the continent's most essential resource, the seeds that feed its people. As the first light of 2025 broke over Burkina Faso's eastern horizon, it illuminated a landscape being transformed, not just physically, but philosophically. The National Seed Revival Program, launched on January 15th with a ceremony that blended scientific precision with cultural reverence, represented the most ambitious agricultural reconstruction project in African history. At demonstration sites across all 13 regions, agricultural teams began the meticulous work of regenerating indigenous cotton varieties that had been cultivated for centuries before corporate intervention, varieties specifically adapted to local soil conditions, rainfall patterns, and traditional farming methods. The heart of this transformation stood in Ouagadougou's University District, the newly established National Seed Research Institute, housed in a striking circular building whose architecture drew inspiration from traditional granaries. Inside, laboratories equipped with state-of-the-art genomic sequencing technology operated alongside chambers where elderly seed keepers shared generational knowledge with young scientists. This deliberate fusion of indigenous wisdom and modern science represented a philosophical stance as much as a research methodology. "We are not rejecting science," explained Dr. Aminata Konate, the Institute's director. "We are reclaiming it as a tool that serves our people rather than extracting from them." The first harvest results from test plots exceeded even optimistic projections. Fields planted with revived heritage seeds showed 24% higher yields than their GM predecessors had produced in recent years, while fiber quality tests revealed strength and length parameters exceeding international premium standards. Most significantly, these results were achieved without dependence on patented chemicals, reducing production costs by 37% and eliminating the debt cycles that had trapped generations of farmers. Time-lapse cameras installed across test sites captured compelling visual evidence. Indigenous cotton varieties grew more vigorously, showed greater resistance to local environmental stresses, and produced more abundant, higher-quality fiber. This agricultural renaissance catalyzed a comprehensive economic restructuring. The Cotton Value Chain Democratization Act dissolved the colonial-era export monopolies that had channeled profits to foreign corporations for decades. In their place emerged a network of farmer-owned processing cooperatives, each operating with governance structures that ensured profits flowed back to the communities producing the cotton. The financial impact was immediate and profound. Average household income in cotton-growing regions increased by 42% within a single growing season, while rural unemployment rates dropped dramatically as processing facilities multiplied across the country. New international partnerships reinforced this economic transformation. Vietnam signed a 5-year purchase agreement, guaranteeing premium prices for Burkina Faso's organic cotton, while Brazilian agricultural equipment manufacturers established regional production facilities, offering tools specifically designed for smallholder farming systems. Most significantly, a trilateral agreement with India and Ethiopia created a South-South knowledge exchange program focused on regenerative agricultural techniques that could revitalize soils depleted by decades of chemical-intensive farming. The Trump administration's approach underwent a striking evolution as the economic impact of isolation became apparent. American textile manufacturers, increasingly dependent on high-quality cotton imports, pressed for diplomatic resolution. By March 2025, the rhetoric of punishment had been replaced by offers of mutually beneficial partnership, with the State Department proposing a compromise that would preserve American market access while acknowledging Burkina Faso's right to agricultural self-determination, an unprecedented concession in international agricultural relations. The corporate world reacted with calculated strategic adjustments. 3 major agricultural corporations announced plans for locally developed, cooperatively owned seed varieties for African markets, a radical departure from previous proprietary models. Investment flowed into smaller companies developing non-GM approaches to agricultural challenges, signaling a market recognition that the paradigm had permanently shifted. Most tellingly, MonsantoAgri's chief financial officer acknowledged in a leaked board meeting that the extractive model is no longer viable in emerging markets where sovereignty movements have taken root. What emerged transcended a mere business model adjustment. It represented the genesis of an entirely new agricultural development paradigm, centered on principles of biological diversity, local adaptation, farmer sovereignty, and equitable profit distribution. This approach directly challenged the industrial agricultural model that had dominated global development frameworks for decades. The implications extended far beyond cotton fields, suggesting a fundamentally new relationship between technology, economics, and human well-being, one where progress was measured not by yield alone, but by the distribution of benefits and the resilience of both ecosystems and communities. The agricultural rebellion, led by Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, is not just a national dispute, it signifies a bold challenge to the global economic system. This act of defiance marks a critical shift in North-South economic relations, where Africa reclaims its agricultural sovereignty. It's a wake-up call to multinational corporations that have long dictated the food systems of developing nations, often at the expense of local economies and cultures. The conflict also poses serious implications for global food systems and agricultural biotechnology. The potential for biotechnology giants to lose their monopoly on seed patents is now tangible, especially as countries in Africa seek to follow Burkina Faso's lead. This shift could disrupt the global market, where American corporate interests dominate, particularly in the agricultural sector. Traoré's vision for African agricultural independence is clear: to restore control over the resources that sustain nations and ensure that the benefits of agriculture stay within local communities. This bold stand may very well mark the beginning of a new era in global agricultural politics, one where nations are empowered to define their agricultural future on their own terms. As Traoré so powerfully stated, the days of slavery are over. It's time to write a new chapter in Africa's agricultural history. If you found this discussion insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to African Stories 247 for more captivating content.